Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with the UK Government regarding the level playing field provision.
Sorry, Mr Torrance, that's not the question I've got in front of me in the paper. It's the impact on Scotland's rural economy if the UK Government's moving away.
Apologies, somebody's printed it off wrong for me.
All right.
Apologies, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what impact could be on Scotland's rural economy of UK Government moving away from the standards and protections that are offered by EU regulations.
Thank you. Minister Marie-Gougeon.
The UK Government's decision will have a detrimental effect on all aspects of Scottish rural life and will remove the standards and protections that Scotland is currently afforded. It puts Scotland at a competitive disadvantage in terms of exporting our produce to European markets, and our organic produce will lose its recognition status on the EU market. Scottish produce could also lose the geographical indication protections we currently enjoy. These are just some of the reasons why the Scottish Government entirely opposes the UK Government's position.
David Torrance.
On Tusk last month to say that UK Government wanted to move away from the standards and protections offered by EU regulations. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that this represents a threat to the future of the Common Frameworks project, given the implications for significant areas of devolved competence, such as environmental protection, regulations around GM crops, marine policy and energy?
Minister. Yes, agreement in October 2017 to the joint intergovernmental programme of work on common frameworks was reached when all 4 administrations agreed that level playing field commitments should be maintained should the UK leave the EU. Now, a move away from that shared assumption of continued regulatory alignment would have implications for the development of common frameworks because it would then widen the scope for policy divergence between the administrations and the different parts of the UK to a much greater degree than was anticipated when work on the project began. And that, of course, could be damaging to Scotland's interests, not least in maintaining high standards in animal welfare and in plant health.
And Peter Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I declare an interest as a farmer. The UK has led the way on standards as far as animal welfare and environmental issues has been concerned for a long number of years, and there is absolutely no reason to believe that this will change post-Brexit. Our standards could actually rise post-Brexit. Will the Minister recognise that?
Minister.
Perhaps they will in Scotland, but I would have serious concern about that elsewhere, because when we look at the previous protocol compared to what we have now, that previous protocol set out specific environmental and climate change commitments, non-regression in the level of environmental protection, respect for environmental principles, commitments to joint setting of minimum air quality standards and other such measures. Now, those commitments are not included in the revised protocol. So I think that is what is seriously concerning to us in the Scottish Government, and why I outlined that in the previous answer to David Torrance.
Question number 2, Peter Chapman.
Thank you again, Presiding Officer. And do I need to declare an interest again? Well, I will. I declare an interest as a partner in the farming business. To ask the Scottish Government how it proposes to spend £160 million in convergence money to support agriculture.
Minister.
The Rural Economy Secretary announced last week that £80 million will be paid by the end of March 2020 to Scotland's active farmers and crofters. The anticipated remaining £80 million will be paid by the end of March 2021, once delivered by the UK Government. He has since announced that the Scottish Government will provide an extra £10 million in 2019-20 to those farming and crofting Scotland's most challenging land. And that's additional to the £80 million being provided this financial year and will be drawn down early from the second £80 million tranche of convergence money.
Peter Chapman.
I thank the Minister for that response. We have already established that £13 million of hard-won convergence money has been used to replace LFAS funds taken from that budget and spent on other things by Derek Mackay. We also know that £10 million of extra funding to the crofting communities has been borrowed from the second tranche of £80 million due next year. I am very concerned that a further £40 million will be used to fill next year's LFAS shortfall. Can the Minister confirm that this is not the intention?
Minister.
Well, first of all, I would like to say that when I saw this question was on the agenda today from Peter Chapman, I think it's particularly brave of him to raise convergence in the chamber, especially given it was their party that withheld that funding from the people it was due, to Scottish farmers and crofters in the first place, and distributed it everywhere else bar Scotland. That was a historic injustice that the Prime Minister admitted to. He'll say it's an injustice and try to right it, but their own party in Scotland has never once admitted that. And it's only because of the Scottish Government and the ministers that we've had in the rural economy since that money was withheld that we got that 160 million back. And it's only because of the Scottish Government and the pressure that we put on the UK Government that we were able to get the first tranche of that £80 million in funding now. Now, from the Tories, I'm not surprised we're going to be criticised no matter what we do. If we hadn't pressurised for that funding and it was taken too long, well, guess what? We would have been too slow. Then we're criticised because we're acting too fast. Now, I completely recognise that there are strong views on either side of this funding, but that is why we are trying to make this as straightforward as possible, to make this as open and transparent as possible. And I have to address some of the comments that have been made by Peter Chapman and that were made during the statement last week when the Cabinet Secretary for the Rural Economy gave the update on the convergence monies. Because to state that this money has either been stolen or spent elsewhere means that the Tories are either completely ignorant of how this system would work or they're deliberately trying to mislead people. And I don't know which of those two situations is worse in that regard. Now, a long time ago, when it was proposed that we could move to areas of natural constraint, there was a general consensus among stakeholders at that time that it was preferred at that point in time to remain with the LFAS system, even though we knew that these reductions would take place. And that is why we are attempting to use this money to support the farmers and crofters and use it where it's needed most in helping and supporting them.
Gail Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome that the Cabinet Secretary met with the Scottish Crofting Federation this week and that an agreement has been reached to move things on, which the Federation and others have cautiously welcomed. But can the Minister tell the Chamber what else the Scottish Government is doing to support crofting and crofters?
Minister.
I would say that the Government has a strong track record of investing in and supporting crofting in Scotland. In the last financial year alone, we've approved and provided croft businesses with over £46 million in CAP and other payments. And I can advise Parliament that since 2007, we've approved over £20.3 million in Croft House grants for Croft housing, helping to build and improve over 970 homes for crofters and for their families. We also provided subsidised rates for crofters to hire health status bulls, subsidised veterinary support and discounted fees for consultancy services through the Farm Advisory Service for over 2,000 crofters who subscribe to that service. This Government values crofting and the contribution it makes, particularly to keeping people on the land in island and remote and rural areas, and we will continue to support and invest in it.
Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the Minister said, the Cabinet Secretary announced that £10 million of the second round of funding will be brought forward to this year, leaving £70 million to be allocated. Can the Minister tell us whether it is still the intention of the Government to continue to use this funding to plug the growing shortfall in LFAS, and if so, how much of the £70 million will be used to plug that gap and what will be left?
Minister.
The Cabinet Secretary for the Rural Economy will be bringing forward further plans as to how that further tranche of funding will be spent as we come to that time.
Number 3, Tom Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I declare an interest as an Aberdeen City Councillor. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the proposed Agri-Food and Nutrition Hub for innovation for Aberdeen.
Minister Marigosham.
This project will build on the strengths of the food and drink sector in the region, providing essential development space that will support the creation of start-ups and accelerate the growth of small businesses. The business case received approval in January 2019 and construction is due to start in 2020.
Tom Mason.
I thank the Minister for that answer and I welcome progress towards its implementation. My region accounts for 17% of the food and drink sector's gross value added and 18% of employment. Excluding whisky, it contributes around 20% of Scotland's output, whilst approaching 25% of Scotland's primary agricultural output and 50% of its fish landings. By contrast, the Scottish Government has announced the Good Food Bill 4 times since 2016, and we are still awaiting for its introduction. This innovation hub will be a huge step forward for the North East and for Scotland as a whole. So can the Minister commit that it will be delivered on time?
Minister.
Well, first of all, I would like to say that in relation to the point that Tom Mason raised about the Good Food Nation bill, I wouldn't want to take too much away from the response that I believe that James Kelly has a question about this later on today. I mean, as far as I'm aware, the project should be running to plan. I haven't heard anything different, but if that changes, I'm sure the member will be made aware.
And question number 4, Angus MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taking to ensure the continuation of Scottish seed potato exports in the event of a no-deal Brexit.
Minister.
The Scottish Government has met regularly with Scottish seed potato representatives to understand the potential impact of a no-deal Brexit. And most recently, those concerns with UK Government were given to UK Government ministers directly at a meeting that was held with the devolved administrations in Edinburgh on the 10th of October. The Scottish Government has also written to UK Government seeking assurances that Scottish seed potato exports to third countries would not be impacted by a no-deal Brexit.
Angus MacDonald.
I thank the Minister for a response. This is yet another sector of the industry where there is unacceptable uncertainty. With Egypt and the Canary Islands being 2 of Scotland's major export markets for our seed potatoes, there's a strong case for the rolling over of existing export agreements with these countries. Will the Minister continue to impress upon the next UK Government the need to protect the export market for the 60,000 tonnes of seed potatoes that are exported from Scotland under current trading arrangements?
Minister.
I can absolutely assure the member of that, because our seed potatoes are prized around the world because of the high health status that they have, and we simply cannot afford to have any of that or that business put at risk by Brexit. And it's something that disproportionately affects us in Scotland compared to the rest of the UK. Now, I've been in regular contact with the British Potato Trade Association to hear their concerns and in turn impress that on the UK Government. Because the people in Scotland, won't be any surprise to anyone here, did not vote for Brexit. But despite that, here we have another example of a very successful sector in the Scottish rural economy that might have to pay a high price for that. Now, I've raised on a number of occasions with the UK Government the issue of tariffs and future trading arrangements with the likes of Egypt and the Canary Islands. And I wrote most recently on the 2nd of October about this. But as yet, we still have absolutely no clarity about what future trading arrangements will be and if this sector will be affected. But we will continue to work with the sector and press the UK Government to get a positive outcome for our seed potato producers.
Question number 5, Liz Smith.
To ask the Scottish Government for an update on the latest applicants to the Knowledge Transfer and Innovation Fund.
Minister Marie Goujon.
The Knowledge Transfer and Innovation Fund Assessment Committee approved 6 applications on the 6th of September this year, and my officials are currently finalising contract arrangements with the beneficiaries. Once concluded, this will bring the total number of approved projects to 33, with a total commitment of just under £5.8 million in the SRDP 2014 to 2020 programme period. We are scheduled to assess another round of applications in February 2020. These innovative projects will focus on restoring, preserving and enhancing ecosystems dependent on agriculture and forestry.
Liz Smith.
To the Minister for a very helpful answer in that respect. Can I just ask whether that refers to operational groups, because that's a question I'm getting from some farmers. And could you tell us exactly just how many people have been enrolled in the scheme?
Minister.
I think that some of that information I would have to get back to the member about to check and see, because this is a very important fund, because it's vitally important that we see this innovation in rural communities, and I visited some of the projects myself. But in relation to those specific points, I'll get that information to Liz Smith.
Thank you. Question number 6, James Kelly.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it will publish the Good Food Nation Bill.
Minister.
Work is underway to draft the bill, and we plan to publish it as part of the legislative programme set out in the programme for government for this parliamentary year.
James Kelly.
Thank the Minister for that answer. I think prompt action on it is, would be welcome by all parties. Can I ask the Minister in relation to the issue of job insecurity and low wages in the food industry, if this is something that will be considered in the bill in order to introduce more worker protection to ensure that workers are better paid and better protected in the food industry?
Minister.
Well, I think as part of this and part of the wider work that we're doing is to become on our way to become a good food nation. I mean, it really encompasses so many different areas because we do, of course, want more people working in our food and drink industry. We need to employ more people, and I think the conditions that people within that sector are working in are a vital important part of that work. So I can't say for certain whether that would be included in the bill itself, but certainly that would be looked at as part of the package of the overall work that we would be doing, again, as we progress towards becoming a good food nation.
Maguire.
Clearly, having a bill in place is important for Scotland's ambition to become a good food nation. However, it requires more than legislation. Can the Minister outline what else is being done to support the ambition?
Minister.
As the programme for measures published last year confirmed, much is already happening across government to make Scotland a good food nation. We committed in the programme for government to publish a progress report on this work, and we will be doing that shortly. Now, as an example of some of that work that's been done, a further £100,000 has been made available this week to new collaborative businesses and projects to help promote Scotland's world-leading food and drink sector through a further round of the highly successful Regional Food Fund. And that's already supported 57 innovative projects across Scotland to the tune of £259,000. And I recently had the pleasure of visiting the Oyster Festival in Stranraer for the second year running, which the fund supported, and saw firsthand the benefits that such support brings. And I can say it was an absolutely fantastic festival, which you can tell does do so much for the local community. Now, it helps our local economies grow and plays a major part in promoting the importance of locally produced food and drink and the environmental benefits of sourcing produce close to home.
Question number 7, Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what income is generated and how many jobs are supported by the leasing of holdings from Forestry and Land Scotland.
Minister.
This year, the forecast gross income from leases from Scotland's National Forest and Land is around £20 million. Of this, around £12 million is from leases of land to wind farm developers and operators. And just last week, a further 2 new wind farms have been announced by Scottish Power Renewables for developments in Argyll and Caithness on Scotland's National Forest and Land. Unfortunately, Forest and Land Scotland do not hold jobs data for those who lease land on Scotland's National Forest and Land. However, renewable energy projects do create employment and local economic activity, as well as providing annual local community benefit payments in excess of £3 million annually.
Richard Lyle.
Thank the Minister for that answer. A few weeks ago, my wife and I visited Pitlochry, as we had tickets for the, yes, Pitlochry, I know where it is, Deputy First Minister, as we had tickets for the Enchanted Forest, which was the excellent, well-attended and very well organised. And I compliment the people who run it. Will the Minister join with me to compliment the people who run the Enchanted Forest, Forestry and Land Scotland for their involvement in this project, and encourage them to possibly look at other areas in Scotland for this type of show?
Minister.
Oh, I thank the member for that question, and at risk of upsetting the Deputy First Minister, I have to admit it's something I haven't had the opportunity to attend and see the Enchanted Forest yet, but I'll definitely make the effort to do so. Now, I'm happy to join Richard Lyle in commending the work that Forestry and Land Scotland do with communities across Scotland to encourage and enable events such as the Enchanted Forest, as well as commending the work that's done by the Community Interest Company that puts this together in what is a really innovative and stunning use of the forestry there. Now, this is an area that Forestry and Land Scotland actively support, and I know that they're open to proposals from groups and communities looking to develop and deliver these types of events.
Thank you. And question number 8, Linda Fabiani.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it promotes venison as a nutritional food.
Minister.
Well, last year I visited the apprentices at Downfield Farm in Fife to help the industry launch the first ever strategy for Scotland's wild and farmed venison sector. Now, that strategy includes an action to build on the good work that's already being done in schools and communities to promote the nutritional benefits of venison as a low-fat, high-iron, quality food. This includes recent events delivered in partnership with the Royal Highland Education Trust at Gilston Estate in Fife and at Luss Estate, with around 600 primary-aged children in attendance. More broadly, we will continue working with stakeholders in the venison sector to take forward wider actions in the strategy to develop more consumer-driven communications campaigns to a wider audience.
Linda Fabiani.
Thank you. Presiding officer, everyone would be aware here that we do have issues with peri-urban deer, and lowland deer stalkers do a great lot of work in that regard, keeping our roads and our urban areas safe. However, I've often thought it's a loss that we don't promote venison as that healthy, nutritional food that it is in urban Scotland. I have raised before the issue of venison larders in urban settings. Could the Minister let me know whether or not this is being actively discussed?
Minister.
The venison industry has a strategy called Beyond the Glen, through which they intend to invest in area-based facilities to maintain wild carcass quality and open new routes to local markets. Now, that includes working with deer groups in the lowlands to implement a scheme around cooperatively owned and operated chillers and larders to meet the needs of this market. There are already existing legal routes to market through licensed venison dealers for deer shot locally for onward sale, and discussions are actually underway with Scottish craft butchers to enhance promotion of these channels next year.
Thank you very much, and that concludes the portfolio questions.